Something that I think we all innately understand, but sometimes ignore to our convenience. Chemistry is an art form. It's not a science. You can't manufacture it in any aspect of your life. But one area that I think we all tend to kind of ignore that is in sports with our teams and our fandom. Because if you want to remain optimistic, sometimes you've got to ignore the fact that your team may not have chemistry. Lakers. And again, it's not a science, it's an art form, right? And if you were to paint or compose the perfect team, you'd have veterans and then you'd sprinkle in some youth, right? And that's what the Warriors have appeared to do. Now, it's kind of obvious what the veteran presence brings, right? They have the knowledge, the experience, the steady hand. They can teach on the court. They can be an extension of the coach. That's what you see with Andre, Steph, and Draymond, right? It makes Kerr's job easier. But in an ideal world, you sprinkle in young players and they can give back to the veterans, help contribute, and balance out the composition, if you will, of your team. The Warriors got Jordan Poole in the mix, GP2, Juan T. And I know some of you are going to say, well, look, Juan T and GP2, they're like 28 years old, but they're young in their basketball careers, right? They still bring a young player energy to the court. And the fact that these guys are in the rotation, they can give back to the veterans. In one way, by just doing some of the dirty work, hustling. You're playing a De'Aaron Fox. You're playing a young Houston team that wants to run all over the place, right? Let some of the young guys take some of those assignments that make you use so much energy, right? But then the other aspect of it is bringing the energy every night. It's early in the season now, but Steph, Draymond, Andre, to ask them to bring the same energy for 82 games at this stage in their career, it's just unrealistic. Right? Part of it is just pacing themselves. They can't do it. They don't want to. But again, when you've sprinkled in young players into the rotation, it helps balance that out. Now, this last week, all of a sudden, Jonathan Kuminga emerges. Another young player in the mix. When I did my scouting of him in the G League, I didn't agree with what the scout said as far as his feel for the game. I thought he had a good feel for the game. But like so many athletic young players, he was relying far too much on his athleticism, particularly on the defensive end, right? He was so athletic, he could recover. His motor would sputter at times. And those were the concerns, as well as the jump shot. Like most young players, will the shot come along for the ride? And then can he space the floor? That same old story, right? But let's start with the defense here. So the Warriors, they're like, how are we going to mold this? They're in a better position to make Kuminga look better than they were a year ago with James Wiseman, where they kind of needed him right away. Because of the vets, because of the depth, they've been able to dangle the carrot out of defense in front of Jonathan Kuminga. Here, check into the game for 2 minutes. If you defend and you hold your own, you play hard, you'll play a little more. And so they're going to nurture him in his growth with defense, because the veterans, be clear, have set the tone that defense has to be the identity of this team. It doesn't matter how many threes they hit, how hot Steph gets, defense will be the identity because it travels, it's consistent, and most importantly, you can control it. And so that's what I think you've seen the Warriors do quietly. Everybody, the explosion, Steph's 50, the threes, all that, but you saw even in that Charlotte loss, as ugly as it was, why were they still in the game? They played defense. And so Jonathan Kuminga, when he checks in for 2 minutes, he has no choice but to defend or he won't play. And that is going to nurture, that's not the right word, that is going to mold him in the correct way. Where you look at someone like Jalen Green, where the Rockets can't hold him accountable. He's going to play 35 minutes no matter what. And you just hope that the bad habits don't stick. So Kuminga's in a perfect situation here. And then I think he's defended better than anybody can anticipate, right? He's out there. He's a switchable big 4-5, and he's showing that he understands the switching concept. I don't have to speak on the physical attributes. He brings a level of athleticism to this roster that we didn't have at that size. I know Wiseman is waiting in the wings, right? And then offensively, look, I'm not going to lie to you and say I'm in love with his release, that four-head release. I'll go into it deeper at a breakdown at some point here on Patreon and see what I see with all the fundamentals there. But here's where he is kind of an outlier with the archetype of player that he is. When you look at a 6'8", super bouncy young player, usually all they try to do is dunk the basketball because that's all they've been able to do it their whole high school, collegiate career, wherever they've come from. They haven't really been challenged at the rim until they get to the league. And you see young athletic guys for a year or two, they really struggle trying to figure out like, oh, I can't just punch it on everybody, right? But Kuminga already has a finesse game in the paint. He already is advanced finishing. Don't get it twisted. He'll blam on you. We know that, right? He'll get up and rise on you. But I think he's got more in the bag than most young guys do getting downhill who are that athletic. You saw the drop step spin move. He's got a left hand. He can play the glass. And so that's super exciting, right? And then just running the floor. And you seeing the Warriors, they already respect him already. They already realize like, yo, if we get this kid the ball coming downhill on the wing, what you gonna do with it? What you gonna do with it? Right? And so it looks like he is just going to take minutes. He's going to take minutes this season. That's what's going to happen. And I also think that that's what's gotten into Kevon Looney of late, right? Looney's been rebounding like a madman. His motor is up because he sees the writing on the wall. James Wiseman's getting ready to come back. Oh, yeah, and now Jonathan Kuminga, he can play the 4, he can play the 5, and he's so much more dynamic. But this is a good thing. Internal competition with depth, youth, and vets brings out the best in everybody. Again, the art of chemistry for the Golden State Warriors this season, it's looking spooky right now. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but if you look at Kuminga's physical traits and how quickly he appears to be learning and just his natural feel for the game, by the end of the season, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's closing with Draymond in the front court. James Wiseman may have something to say about that, right? But again, internal competition. But Kuminga has a much better feel than people were giving him credit for. And all of a sudden, you drop him into this environment with an Andre Iguodala, a Draymond Green, and a staff that is focusing in on nurturing the talent. And it's a recipe for great chemistry and a team that can do much more than I think we expected. Again, it's early on here, but the thing is with Wiseman, Kuminga, and if they're going to play a young, a big, and the matchup may determine what they do. Like if they're playing Utah, you may use Wiseman against Gobert late, right? But Jonathan Kuminga has two things that James Wiseman doesn't. And we've learned that already in like a couple games. Feel and an it factor. It's undeniable. And so the sky's the limit with this environment for Jonathan Kuminga, man. I'm excited. These are good problems to have. These are rich people problems in the NBA. I do think that it adds more pressure to Kerr and the coaching staff because the more options you have, the more room there is for criticism. For instance, with the closing lineups. You could have Bielitsa out there stretching the floor. You could have GP2 in the dunker spot. You could go with good old reliable Loon, although he wasn't that reliable the other night in Charlotte. You could go with Wiseman. Maybe you want his vertical spacing. Oh, we need Kuminga's switching on defense. Now that there's all these options, there's more room to mess up the rotation as to when you don't have depth and you got what you got. Hey, but again, more money, more problems is what they say, right? And so you can't complain about the situation. I'm sure Kerr and the staff will not. Tonight, big game. Nets, Warriors, the MVP competition between these two. I think it's gonna be on. I think we're in for something epic here. Now, what is my prediction? I try to stay away from predictions, man, because all you're going to do is get it wrong, right? But, I think on the road, I think KD, Harden, they still have, salt towards this Warriors organization. So I think they come out with a flurry of offense and just stomp the Warriors. If you know, you know. I'm out, y'all.